dire dharam raja svabhavena panayo ye chatan anu. Please chant.
Ayanti kena satvena divim deva prapedire dharam raja swabhavena panayo ye chatan anu.
अत्यन्तिकेन सत्त्वेन देवीं देव प्रपेदिरे प्रपेदिरे धरं राज स्वभावेन पाणयो यच तान् अनु. हरे कृष्ण.
हरे कृष्ण. अत्यन्तिकेन सत्त्वेन दिवं देवा प्रपेदिरे धरां रजः स्वभावेन प्रणयो ये च तान् अनु. हरे कृष्ण.
आत्यन्तिकेन सत्त्वेन दिवं देवा प्रपेदिरे धरं रजस्वभावेन पणयो ये च तन्ननु.
Thank you. Atyantikena, excessive. Sattvena, by the mode of goodness. Divam, in the higher planets. Devaha, the demigods. Apayadire have been situated. Dharam, on the earth. Rajaha, the mode of passion. Swabhavena, by nature. Pannayaha, the human being. Yea, all those. Cha, also. Tan, there. Anu, subordinate. Translation and purport by Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The demigods, qualified by the super excellent quality of the mode of goodness, are situated in the heavenly planets, whereas the human beings, because of their nature and the mode of passion, live on the earth in company with their subordinates. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, texts 14 and 15, it is said that those who are highly developed in the mode of goodness are promoted to the higher heavenly planetary system, and those who are overpowered by the mode of passion are situated in the middle planetary systems, the Earth and similar planets. But those who are surcharged with the mode of ignorance are degraded to the lower planetary systems or to the animal kingdom. The demigods are highly developed in the mode of goodness, and thus they are situated in the heavenly planets. Below human beings are the animals, although some of them mingle with human society. Cows, horses, dogs, and so on are habituated to living under the protection of human beings. The word atyantikena is very significant in this verse. By development of the mode of goodness of material nature, one can become situated in the heavenly planets. But by excessive development of the modes of passion and ignorance, the human being indulges in killing animals who are meant to be protected by mankind. Persons who indulge in unnecessary animal killing have excessively developed in the modes of passion and ignorance and have no hope of advancing to the mode of goodness. They are destined to be degraded to lower statuses of life. The planetary systems are calculated as upper and lower in terms of the classes of living entities who live there. Translation again, the demigods qualified by the super excellent quality of the mode of goodness are situated in the heavenly planets, whereas the human beings, because of their nature in the mode of passion, live on the earth in company with their subordinates. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namane Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravanipacharne Nirvishesha Shunyabadi Paschati Deshtare Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhya Shakrapa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So today is also the appearance day of Sri Advaita Acharya. Okay, sorry about that. My Zoom glitched out. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. So just mentioning that today is also the appearance day of Srila Advaita Acharya. After we discuss today's verse, we can talk a bit about him. But okay, so this morning in the verse that we just read and the purport, it's been revealed that depending on which of the three modes of material nature that are prominently affecting us, that will determine where we live. So the demigods who are in goodness live in the heavenly planet. The humans in passion live with the animals who are in ignorance on the earthly realm. So even in a city, right, in this material world, so pick a city inside of a state, inside of a country, on a continent, anyone. Even in a single city, it is abundantly clear that certain neighborhoods are more heavenly than others. And that if one doesn't have the necessary monetary piety, one cannot take advantage of the many precious commodities and abundant resources that are standard in those places, right? Because other parts of the same city are filled with rundown houses that are not maintained. And the owners of those unproperly maintained houses give the excuse that in order to keep rent affordable for a certain class of people, that they can't actually maintain the building. Otherwise, the prices would go too high. You wouldn't even be able to live here. So they make it sound like they're doing you a favor. So under the excuse of keeping them affordable, people are living in these rundown domiciles, right? And the residents are often, as today's verse mentions, living in the company of their subordinates, right? So in his purport today, Srila Prabhupada mentions horses and cows and dogs and so on. But in these specific neighborhoods, the living spaces are shared with living entities like rats and cockroaches, for example, right? So we can observe this basically in any city. So many times this seems like an unfair and even an unconquerable system, right? The rich are always getting richer, the poor are always getting poorer. But the thing that sits badly with anyone with an observant eye and a soft heart is that these rich people who are exploiting the poor, they don't actually possess the mode of goodness, right? So it seems unfair that they should enjoy relatively heavenly delights, right? It can make sense to us if we're reading Shastra in theory that, yeah, the heavenly planets, they're a place where people are very pious. They're in the mode of goodness. Therefore, they deserve to have such heavenly pleasures. not only did they earn the place with the proper piety, but they're using it accordingly, right? Those in the upper heavenly planets, the Devatas, they're deputed by the Supreme Lord to actually give protection to the rest of the universe, right? And they do so in a very nice way. And so when we observe in these cities um, rich people who are enjoying these heavenly pleasures, but they're not taking proper responsibility and giving protection to, means most of them. Some of them are. But for the most part, we see this, again, seemingly unconquerable system that's in place where the weak are being exploited by the strong. And so it can seem unfair, right? So in this world, this material world, especially in the age of quarrel and hypocrisy, and especially in the earthly realm, even the slightest tinge of motive goodness is extremely rare, right? Uh, and when we're under the influence of the lower modes, it's difficult to understand what is real, what is false, what is to be done, what is not to be done. And as such, since we don't actually know what's proper behavior and improper behavior, we often don't understand why the world works the way it does. And so the consequences seem to be unfair. We observe a situation and it just doesn't seem right, right? It doesn't seem uh, like it should be going this way. It doesn't seem fair. Uh, the other issue we have in the material world is we only know what we have access to. So, although some people in the earthly realm are living relatively more comfortable lives than others, they're actually still covered by the lower modes, just to different degrees, right? So, still being covered by passion and ignorance, they don't know what is to be done and what is not to be done. And since that passion is there, they're looking to exploit others for their own pleasure, right? The passion's there. But since there was some piety, even though it's covered with passion and ignorance, they're able to temporarily enjoy a standard that's only actually slightly higher. It may seem quite a bit higher from our perspective, but it's really only slightly higher, and it's temporary. It doesn't last long at all. But anyway, if we try to make sense of all of this, trying to figure out why good things happen to, you know, or why bad things happen to good people, and so on. Um, and if we're trying to make sense of it only using our mental faculties, we will fail and we will be frustrated. So there's something I've been quoting fairly often because in my other class we're going through Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, and his thesis statement in that book is that there are countless philosophies, and although attempting to reach the truth, they're all incomplete and mutually contradictory, being generated from illusory premises. And all of these philosophies can find their perfection in Krishna Bhakti. So if we base our assessment on what is right and what is wrong, just based on our personal experiences or our material sense of logic and our material sense of morality, what is right and wrong, um, then we will not actually have a clear picture of what reality is because we are basing them on illusory premises, right? But if we base our understanding on Shastra, right, authorized scriptures descending from the Supreme Lord and explained by a bona fide representative of the Supreme Lord who it has no material motive whatsoever, then we can start understanding how the world is actually working, right? And then we're not worried about, well, this doesn't seem fair, that doesn't seem fair, like that, because we can actually see the difference between reality and illusion. So as we cleanse the mirror of our hearts with the process of pure, offenseless chanting, we're able to actually see these things as they are, right? So under the influences of passion and ignorance, what to speak of goodness, which is tinged by these two, one can't see clearly. One can't see actually what is to be done and what is not to be done. So one is doing what one thinks is actually acceptable, right? And then we become surprised when the results don't meet up to our expectations, right? We expect a certain result because we're doing what we think is right, but in actuality, what we're doing is wrong. And so therefore, we're getting exactly what we deserve. It just doesn't seem fair because we don't know what is right and what is wrong. But when we're able to come into contact with Sanatana Dharma, with the eternal principles, um, and we're able to engage in this process, especially of chanting, Cheto Darpana Marjana. And if we do that with no motive, without interruption, without being tinged by desires for fruitive results or based on mental speculation, then we're able to see actually what is to be done and what is not to be done. And then we can act accordingly. And if we act accordingly to reality, then we can attain the highest goal of engaging in pure loving service to the Supreme Lord, right? And when this happens, it will be crystal clear to us when this happens that even the mode of goodness is not something that we aspiring Vaishnavas want as our ultimate goal, right? Because here we learn that those that are situated in the mode of goodness, excessive mode of goodness, they live in the heavenly planets, but the heavenly planets, they're still temporary, right? So it's not the ultimate goal. It can be a very valuable stepping stone, but it's not the ultimate goal. So although it can be very helpful and in most cases a very necessary stepping stone to spiritual awakening, if we see it as an independent quality, not in relation to the Supreme Lord, then we will not be able to give up our attachment to it. And we will, as today's verse points out, have to remain in this temporary material world. Right? It'll be the heavenly planet. Life will be quite long. There will be some nice relative enjoyment relative to the suffering that is there in the earthly realm. But it's temporary. So as eternal beings, this is actually unacceptable. And this is why Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu pointed out in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita that the concept of so-called good and bad in this world is actually all just bad. So this is what he says. This is Antya Lila, chapter 4, verse 176. He says, in the material world, conceptions of good and bad are all mental speculations. Therefore, saying this is good and this is bad is all a mistake. In his purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada writes, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the absolute truth, ever existing with different varieties of energies. When one is absorbed in the illusory energy of Krishna and cannot understand Krishna, one cannot ascertain what is good for him and what is bad. Conceptions of good and bad are all imaginations or mental speculations. When one forgets that he is an eternal servant of Krishna, he wants to enjoy the material world through different plans. At that time, he distinguishes between material plans that are good and those that are bad. Actually, however, they are all false, right? So this idea of good and bad in this material world, there's something to it if we're in this material world, right? In material consciousness, if we do the right thing, then we can enjoy a better temporary result. We do the wrong thing, then we suffer a worse temporary suffering, right? So there's something to it. There's benefit, some minor benefit to understanding the right thing and doing the right thing, right? But if we don't see that in relation to our actual position, our Sanatan Dharma, not just the material morals, but our actual nature, then we actually just perpetually stay in this material world. We may go up to the heavenly planets, but if we don't understand that connection to the Supreme Lord, then we go back down to the middle or to the lower planets, depending on how our mood, our understanding, our activities shift, right? Our consciousness, right? How deeply it's covered by these other modes of material nature. So trying to get a better material result, right? Or even trying to understand the mechanics of this material world with our own mental prowess without consulting the authorized shastras or the representatives of the shastras, it's simply going to be a waste of time, right? Trying to get a better material result is going to be a waste of time because it's material and we're eternal beings. So although temporarily we may be able to enjoy it, ultimately it's a waste of time. And trying to understand the mechanics of it all by our own mental or physical prowess also going to be a waste of time. Because as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur pointed out, that although attempting to reach the truth, if your philosophy is based on an illusory premise, it cannot be complete and it will be contradictory, right? So also, as pointed out in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, when analyzing action, inaction, and forbidden action, so akarma, karma, and vikarma, when it comes down to it, for the aspiring spiritualist, there's actually only forbidden action and direct Krishna consciousness, right? We have to understand the difference between these three. But when one is on the spiritual path, one understands that any action in the material world, whether it's proper material action or improper material action, it's an improper action because it's not properly connected to Krishna, right? So for the aspiring spiritualist, although we can see it in terms of karma, akarma, and vikarma, it's really only akarma, which is work without reaction, direct Krishna consciousness, and vikarma, forbidden actions or prohibited actions. So although proper material action is considered better than forbidden action in the material world, since the goal is merely a temporary result for an eternal being, it's just unacceptable, as we explained. So Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter, verse 17 says, this is, oh, yeah. But yes. The intricacies of action are very hard to understand. Therefore, one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. So karma, vikarma, and akarma. So in his purport to this verse, Bhagavad Gita 4:17, Srila Prabhupada gives, as he often does in his purports, he gives the essence of Krishna consciousness, but he gives it to us in terms that are relatable to us who are not familiar with the language of the Vedas. So this is one of my, and this is, when I say this, it's always kind of funny. I always say this is one of my favorite purports. But the thing is with Srila Prabhupada's purports is they're all kind of favorite purports. I remember when I first moved into the temple, my roommate was reading through Bhagavad Gita and he had a highlighter. He was highlighting different passages. And I said, man, just dip the book in yellow ink, man. It's all super important, right? So in one sense, it is, when you say one of my favorite verses or one of my favorite purports, it means most of it is your favorite verse or purport, depending on what the situation or the circumstance is, depending on what our level of understanding is, depending on what we're currently focusing on. Basically, whatever's going to bring us closer to Krishna, those are our favorite purports. And Srila Prabhupada is doing that with each of his purports. So they can all potentially be our favorite purport. So But so Srila Prabhupada in discussing these three things, action means material action, forbidden material action, and inaction, which is action in Krishna consciousness, which will produce no reaction. Um, uh, he comments thus: if one is serious about liberation from material bondage, one has to understand the distinctions between action, inaction, and unauthorized actions. One has to apply oneself to such an analysis of action, reaction, and perverted actions because it is a very difficult subject matter, right? So to know, and it also gets confusing because the very next verse, 418, it's always been confusing for a lot of people because you hear it and you're like, wait, that sounds contradictory or hard to understand. One who sees inaction in action and action in inaction is intelligent among men, and he is in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities, right? So it sounds like it doesn't make any sense. How is this an intelligent person? They can see action in inaction and inaction in action. It sounds like the person's just confused. They don't know the difference between the two, right? But as it mentions, although engaged in all sorts of activities, they're not actually performing action because the principle uh, means the consciousness is directed at serving Krishna. So therefore, there's no material reaction. Therefore, it's not actually an action. So Srila Prabhupada is admitting in the beginning of this purport that it can be a very difficult subject matter to wrap one's head around unless we're being guided by authorized Shastra and authorized representatives of Shastra. Now, the middle section of this purport is my absolute favorite part of this purport because Srila Prabhupada gives us the principle broken down in our language without means without losing the principle. He's talking to us who aren't familiar with the language of the Vedas in our own language without losing anything. So this is the middle part of this purport. To understand Krishna consciousness and action according to its mode, one has to learn one's relationship with the Supreme. That is, one who has learned perfectly knows that every living entity is an eternal servitor of the Lord, and that consequently one has to act in Krishna consciousness. The entire Bhagavad Gita is directed toward this conclusion. Any other conclusions against this consciousness and its attendant actions are vikarmas or prohibited actions, right? So anything that's not completely, purely engaging in Krishna service is known as a vikarma, a forbidden action. This is what Srila Prabhupada's pointing out. I'm going to read this portion of the purport one more time, and then I'm going to read something else because this is actually Srila Prabhupada paraphrasing Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is the beautiful part. So again, this section of the purport. To understand Krishna consciousness and action according to its modes, one has to learn one's relationship with the Supreme. That is, one who has learned perfectly knows that every living entity is an eternal servitor of the Lord, and that consequently one has to act in Krishna consciousness. The entire Bhagavad Gita is directed toward this conclusion. Any other conclusions against this consciousness and its attendant actions are vikarmas, or prohibited actions. So when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was instructing Srila Sanatana Goswami about the process of bhakti, and he was giving Srila Sanatana Goswami a service, he was saying, I'm going to explain this to you. Now you explain it to all of the devotees so they know how to behave, to act properly, to advance in this process of devotional service. So he had conversations with Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Sanatana Goswami, and basically gave them an outline for the works that they were to compile in order to in order to make the process of bhakti accessible, right? So in Madhya Lila, chapter 6, hold on, is this where I wanted to go already? Yeah. Text 78, here's a verse. Bhagavan Sambandha Bhakti Abhideya Hai Prema Prayojana Veda Tini Vastukai. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the central point of all relationships. Acting in devotional service to him is one's real occupation, and the attainment of love of God is the ultimate goal of life. These three subject matters are described in the Vedic literature. Then the next verse, 179. If one tries to explain the Vedic literature in a different way, he is indulging in imagination. Any interpretation of the self-evident Vedic version is simply imagination. So this is what Srila Prabhupada is paraphrasing in his purport to Bhagavad Gita 4:17. He's explaining Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana, and that if you're trying to come to any other conclusion that's not following this format, then this is a vikarma. So I'll read that purport again and then point out where the parallels are. To understand Krishna consciousness, this is Bhagavad Gita 4:17 purport, the middle, and action according to its modes, one has to learn one's relationship with the Supreme. So learn one's relationship means knowledge of the relationship. That means sambandha gyan. That is, one who has learned perfectly knows that every living entity is an eternal servitor of the Lord, right? So that is our eternal relationship. We are eternal servitors of the Lord. And that consequently, one has to act in Krishna consciousness, means once one knows that relationship, one has to act accordingly, right? That's the Abhideya. The entire Bhagavad Gita is directed toward this conclusion, right? And so in terms of Madhya Lila, if one tries to explain the Vedic, these three subject matters are described in the Vedic literature. If one tries to explain the Vedic literature in a different way, he is indulging in imagination. Any interpretation of the self-evident Vedic version is simply imaginary. So the end of that excerpt of Bhagavad Gita purport. The entire Bhagavad Gita is directed toward this conclusion. Any other conclusions against this consciousness and its attendant actions are vikarmas, or prohibited actions, right? So Srila Prabhupada was very much giving us this understanding in our own language without dumbing down the principle or without losing the principle, right? Oftentimes, when we try to present something to someone according to their understanding, we end up missing something, right? We end up leaving something out almost necessarily. But Srila Prabhupada was so expert that he could present these things in our language and still have the principle intact, right? Without any confusion whatsoever. So regarding these three, Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana, I have a few more quotes from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita that will help us understand the importance of approaching Vedic knowledge through this so that we're sure that we're not getting distracted by anything that's secondary to the actual principle. So this is Madhya Lila chapter 20, verse 124. Again, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructing Srila Sanatana Goswami. Chapter 20, 21, 22, 23. Chapter 20 gives in the sort of toward the end, middle-ish end, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives Srila Sanatana Goswami an overview of what Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana is and how it's essential to understand and explain Vedic literature in this way exclusively. And then in chapter 21, 22, and 23, there are entire chapters with hundreds of verses that are dedicated to each of these three, Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So chapter 20, verse 124. The Vedic literatures give information about the living entity's eternal relationship with Krishna, which is called Sambandha. The living entity's understanding of this relationship and his acting accordingly is called Abhideya, right? So it just means understanding what our true position is and acting according to that position, seeing reality and acting according to it. And returning home back to Godhead is the ultimate goal of life and is called Prayojana. So that's the ultimate goal. Same chapter, verse 143. In the Vedic literatures, Krishna is the central point of attraction. His service is our activity to attain the platform of love of Krishna is what life's ultimate goal. Therefore, Krishna, Krishna's service, and love of Krishna are the three great riches of life. Again, Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. And then Madhya 25, 102. So then after going through those, then then we basically have a summary on the three together and how we are to see them while studying Srimad Bhagavatam. So Madhya 25, 102. Bhagavatera Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana Chatushlokite Prakata Tara Karyache Lakshana. The essence of Srimad Bhagavatam, our relationship with the Supreme Lord, Sambandha, our activities in that connection, Abhideya, and the goal of life, Prayojana, is manifest in the 4 verses of Srimad Bhagavatam known as the Chatur Shloki. Everything is explained in those verses. Then, same chapter, Madhya 25, verse 131. Thus, one's relationship with the Supreme Lord, Sambandha, activities in devotional service, Abhideya, and the attainment of the highest goal of life, Prayojana, love of Godhead, are the subject matters of Srimad Bhagavatam, Bas. These are the subject matters of Srimad Bhagavatam. Anything outside of that is going to be based on illusory premises. It's going to be mental speculation. It's going to be a distraction of the secondary with the primary. So we'll think that we're actually performing devotional service, but not actually attaining the full results of devotional service because we're not actually understanding what our relationship is with the Supreme Lord, how to act according to that relationship, and therefore won't be able to reach the ultimate goal. So, that said, although technically there is a concept of good and bad in this world that we can follow and it can help us understand transcendence, unless we are actually focusing on that eternal principle, Sanatana Dharma, then we're just perpetuating our cyclic so-called enjoyment and suffering. I say so-called enjoyment because really it's just suffering and slightly less suffering, right? When we're suffering a lot, when that suffering is decreased, we perceive it as pleasure because it's not as bad, right? That's the trick of this, the dualities of this material world. It's not actually happiness and distress, it's distress and slightly less distress. That's what we're dealing with here, right? Because an eternal being can't have true happiness if it's temporary, right? That's not real happiness. It's a reflection of real happiness. So, but just because in the material world the sense of good and bad are both essentially bad, that's not to say that we don't strive for the mode of goodness to act as a stepping stone for our devotional growth, right? We shouldn't give we shouldn't give it more credit than it deserves, but at the same time, we do have to give it enough credit that we can use it to help us understand Krishna more. So in Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, text 15 in its purport. So in today's verse, Srila Prabhupada mentioned Bhagavad Gita 14, 14, and 15, which is explaining how depending on which modes we are influenced by, that will determine basically our next lives, where we get promoted, whether we get promoted to the heavenly planets or whether we are in the middle planetary systems or are demoted to lower species. So in his purport to the 15th verse of the 14th chapter, Srila Prabhupada writes, therefore, those who are actually serious about human life should take to the mode of goodness and, in good association, transcend the modes and become situated in Krishna consciousness. This is the aim of human life. So we do accept the mode of goodness, but then in good association, we have to become transcendental to all of the modes, including goodness, right? So using goodness to understand the difference between right and wrong in this material world, and then using just that as a stepping stone, taking advantage of the association of devotees to then be able to transcend the modes altogether. This is actually the aim of human life. So as pointed out in the end of today's purport, Those who live their lives at the cost of others' suffering, they cannot know compassion. They can't actually understand what compassion is. And so when people are discompassionate toward us, we view it as unfair, right? But if we purify our lower modes by regulation and cultivation of goodness, by whichever method we're willing to accept it, right? For some people, that just means atheistic morality. For some people, that means quasi-theistic morality. For some people, it means actual theistic morality. For some people, it's impersonalism, right? If we're able to purify these lower modes, passion and ignorance, by cultivating goodness, then with that cultivation of goodness, we will be more likely to take up direct devotional service in the future. But direct, pure, unmotivated, uninterrupted devotional service is our goal, and we shouldn't be distracted by its concomitant results, right? So as we're engaging in bhakti and we're realizing that we're also enjoying the results of piety, we shouldn't be distracted by those and think, oh, this is actually nice. This is good enough, right? We should keep our eyes on the actual goal, understand our relationship, act according to that relationship, and then reach the ultimate goal. So for us aspiring Vaishnavas, we are to clearly understand the difference between the primary and the secondary and never lose sight of the actual ultimate goal, the Sanatana Dharma, right? Our eternal nature, our true, unpolluted nature as eternal, fully cognizant, blissful servants of Sri Hari. So although we make use of these secondary aspects that can assist our growth in bhakti, we understand that unless we consciously connect these things to the primary, to the Sanatana Dharma, then we're just dealing with matter, right? The example I give often is vegetarianism, right? Because Srila Prabhupada mentioned in the purport that those who are slaughtering animals, they can't understand these higher principles. They're not going to understand goodness, right? They're going to continue to be covered by the modes of passion and ignorance. So vegetarianism is a good stepping stone to bring us to a platform which we can become further purified and see what is actually reality. But in principle, we're actually not vegetarians. We only eat things that are offered to Krishna, right? Yajna Shishtashina Shanto Muchante Sarva Kilabisai Bunjate Te Tvagam Papa Ye Pachantyat Makaranat. That those who are eating food merely for sense enjoyment, even if it's vegetarian foodstuffs, they're verily eating only sin, right? But the devotees of the Lord, they're released from that sin because they're eating foodstuffs which are first offered to Krishna, right? So the principle is doing everything for Krishna, right? Understanding our relationship with Krishna, acting according to that relationship, and then meeting the ultimate goal, Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana. If we just think that vegetarianism is enough, right? Now we've come to the human platform and that's it. We're not offering our food. We're just living a pious life. The best we can do is enjoy in the heavenly planets for a temporary amount of time. And then again, we have to build up that piety if we want to enjoy those heavenly planets again. But if we want to actually tap into our actual nature, the real bliss, not just a reflection of it, then we have to see, we have to attain knowledge of that relationship with the Supreme Lord, act according to that relationship appropriately and favorably. And then, and only then, we can reach our final goal. So just to summarize, the modes of material nature that we have acquired due to our desire to enjoy separately from Krishna, they affect every aspect of our lives as long as we identify with the false conception of the self. So if we clear ourselves of the lower modes by living a regulated lifestyle, it can become easier and more natural for us to engage in Krishna service. Now, I say natural because it is literally our nature right? That's our eternal nature, to engage lovingly in Krishna service. So peeling back these covering layers of the modes of material nature allows us to see more clearly and uncover our actual nature, right? So that's our real nature shining through. But only insofar as much as we redirect our consciousness from self-centric to God-centric. If we make a mistake of identifying as the cause of our newfound clarity, as I mentioned before, and we become proud of it, right, with this self-centric behavior, the best we can become is a demigod in the material world, right, which is a temporary position. But if we understand this clarity, due to these modes of material nature being peeled back, is actually coming from the Supreme Lord, right? And then we act appropriately, understanding our true relationship with Him, then we will be able to reach our ultimate goal, which is really just the beginning in a place where there is no beginning. So that's fun. So we'll stop there. I do want to say something about Srila Advaita Acharya, since it's his appearance day. One thing that my Guru Mata pointed out early on, so they heard the stories of Advaita Acharya, how he was sitting on the bank of the Ganga, and he was offering tulsi leaves and Ganga water to the Shalagram Shila, and he was very loudly asking for the Lord to come to this material world to save the fallen conditioned souls. And she was saying that during that time when people were hearing this story, it wasn't actually clear that Advaita Acharya was actually a limb of Krishna. He's Mahavishnu, right? They just thought he was some pious fellow who was able to, call the Lord down to appear and save the fallen conditioned souls. But then as time went by, and then we had access to the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita and its purports. Then we understood, oh, he's actually quite an important figure. He's the Supreme Lord. He is capital H, He, right? And so just like Mahavishnu expands this material world for our benefit, Sri Advaita Acharya, let's see, I'll just read a few verses. Adi Leela 6th chapter, verse 27. As he had formerly created all the universes, now he descended to introduce the path of bhakti. So when Krishna comes, he doesn't just come alone, right? He brings his associates. And so sometimes, or always, some of his associates will come before he does and sort of get the place ready, right? We hear like when Lord Balaram first appeared in the womb of Devaki, he was preparing the womb for the arrival of Krishna, right? And so Advaita Acharya, he was preparing us for the arrival of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he preached Krishna Bhakti, right? He preached to Vishvambara, Vishvarup, right? Krishna, Lord Chaitanya's brother, his older brother. So he was preaching to him. He's preaching to Srivas. He's preaching to whoever's actually listening. But he noticed that there were certain tendencies towards impersonalism, etc. And so he situated himself on the bank of the Ganga and offered Ganga water and tulsi leaves to the Shalagram Shila, and very loudly begged for the Supreme Lord to come down. So Adi Leela 634, he worshipped Krishna with tulsi leaves and water of the Ganges and called for him in a loud voice. Thus, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared on the earth, accompanied by his personal associates. It is through him, Srila Advaita Acharya, that Lord Chaitanya spread the Sankirtana movement, and through him that he delivered the world. The glory and attributes of Advaita Acharya are unlimited. How can the insignificant living entities fathom them? And Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj points out that Advaita Acharya, he's not just a part. He's not just like we Jiva Tattva, we're part and parcel of Krishna. He's actually Vishnu Tattva. He is a limb of Krishna. So we can appreciate him for what he did. So he is the Supreme Lord, and he came in the form of a devotee. And he and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had a very unique relationship. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, since Advaita Acharya was a disciple of his grand spiritual master, his spiritual master's spiritual master, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw Advaita Acharya as his superior, and he would often want to take instructions from him. And Advaita Acharya, of course, knowing Lord Chaitanya to be Krishna himself, and he being Mahavishnu, which is subordinate to Krishna, although they're the same, they're also different. They're different aspects. And so he saw himself as inferior. So there was always this sort of power struggle dynamic, but it wasn't like the power struggles in the material world. In the material world, people are struggling to determine who's the master, right? And here they were struggling to determine who was the servant, right? The Supreme Lord himself in the mood of Srimati Radharani in the form of a devotee, and Mahavishnu in the form of a devotee were fighting each other to determine who was the servant, right? And so we have this unique relationship. I did go over time, so I apologize for that. But let's stop here and see if there are any questions, comments, or discussions based on today's reading, or if anyone wants to share any appreciation of Srila Advaita Acharya. And now is a very good time for that.
Hare Krishna, Cārucandra Prabhu. Thank you so
Right.
much for a wonderful class. Before people drop off, I just wanted to mention that tonight we have a festival for Dvaita Acharya Prabhu. And it'll be at the Bhakti Garden where we have the deities of the Panchatattva, 1408 South Street. We will begin at 6:30 and go to about 8:30. So all the devotees, please try to come down and offer your respects to Advaita Acharya as we celebrate his appearance day. Sorry, we can go to questions. I just know sometimes people have to drop off as it gets on. I just wanted to put that announcement out there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Okay. Anything else?
The mode of goodness, Prabhu, as you were speaking
Yes.
about it, and it's the relative nature of goodness and bad that was there. I mean, it seems to be a topic that always seems to come up in with devotees, and I feel that sometimes we're afraid to appreciate the values of the mode of goodness because it's still subservient to our ultimate goal.
Yes.
But when we look at the material world, especially the world we're living in right now during Kali Yuga, not necessarily the world that's described in previous yugas, but when we look out our window and we're walking down the street and we see the things we see, and we see if things were just in the mode of goodness, it'd be such an improvement. I feel like sometimes we sell it short, just what that could possibly mean of elevating people to the mode of goodness. With the goal of trying to bring them to the spiritual platform, and is there could an argument be made, or would it be a bad argument, that to bring human society to the mode of goodness would be a stepping stone or a direction to bring them ultimately to the path of Krishna consciousness? Or is that a misdirected energy where the energy should really be just trying to reawaken people's dormant love for God?
That's a great question. It's a very important one. And it could go either way depending on what our consciousness is and what our potency is also. Because even if we have the best consciousness and we're trying to bring people to the mode of goodness so that they can actually take proper advantage of the process of bhakti, their consciousness may not be in line with ours, right? So we could just be uh, uh, turning, people into, I mean, better human beings. So it all depends on the motive, on the consciousness, as we were discussing today, Sambandha, Abhidheya, and Prayojana. If we are through bringing people to the mode of goodness, explaining what our eternal relationship is with the Supreme Lord, not just come to the mode of goodness because you'll enjoy better or you'll suffer less, right? Or you may have the opportunity to then, from that platform, then pick up spirituality. So even in the lower modes, if we understand the principle, which is understanding what our true relationship is and acting according to that relationship, if that's what we focus on, then naturally we will rise to the mode of goodness. And as Srila Prabhupada mentions, then in the association of devotees, transcend the mode of goodness and the other modes as well, right? And so that's the idea. So if we focus on the principle, then we're never going to lose. If we focus on the details, we're always going to lose, right? So we have this tendency to either give way too much credit to the mode of goodness or not nearly enough credit to the mode of goodness. Because for most of us covered by these lower modes, mode of goodness is going to help us quite a bit to actually um, help fulfill our intentions, because our intentions as aspiring devotees who are covered by passion and ignorance is to understand bhakti. But what we don't realize is that we're not properly, completely engaging this principle of knowing our relationship with Krishna and acting according to that relationship, right? We're still acting uh, to some degree based on our conditioned nature, our misidentification with the material world, right? And until we're able to rectify that, means through this understanding of who am I, who's Krishna, what is our actual relationship, and then acting accordingly. Until we're able to do that, we're not going to make advancement. So bringing us up to the level of goodness helps us to get that consciousness. That's why Srila Prabhupada gave us these four regulative principles. They're called principles, but they're actually details to one principle, which is whatever you do, do it for Krishna. If you're eating, eat for Krishna. Means a side effect of that is that you're vegetarian, right? Um, all of these principles serve, or all of these regulative principles serve, it's just one principle, right? But if we look at them from an external point of view, we're just looking at the not the actual principle, but the detail, right? The secondary. And if we think that is where the substance is, right? It's a shadow, but if we think that's the substance, then we're not actually going to make advancement, right? So it is in our best interest to first, um, you know, if we're unable to make that connection, understand who we are, our actual position, who Krishna is, and work accordingly, it is in our best interest to modify our behavior based on Shastra, based on the authorized scriptures and the representatives of those authorized scriptures, to give us a program that we can refrain from certain things and accept certain things that will bring us to a better platform by which we can understand this principle. But the principle should always be um, focused on. It can come through the details, but the principle has to be the most important thing. Because otherwise, if we put too much emphasis on the detail, the detail will elevate us in material life. But if we're actually identifying still with material life, not identifying as servant of Krishna, right, misusing that free will, then the best we can do is make it to the heavenly planets for, a lifetime and enjoy. All right. But then, we have to come back and build up the piety to do it again if that's what we want to keep doing. But if we want the true bliss, we have to actually identify with our true nature, right? Not the false ego, the real ego. I am servant of Krishna, right? I am not independent from Krishna. So yeah, these things become difficult because we see the dangers of either giving too much credit to things like the mode of goodness or not enough, and we tend to overcorrect, right? If we see that eventually it has to be given up, then we don't even want to try to strive for it because we're afraid that we're going to become distracted. Or if the other way, we see that it has some value, that it can bring us to a proper platform where we can take better advantage of the association of devotees and have a clearer understanding of what the Shastra is saying. But if we put too much emphasis on the mode of goodness and not enough emphasis on what its purpose is to bring us to the higher platform, right? Both of those are dangerous. And most of us fall into one of those categories. To have a healthy balance is quite rare, but it can become significantly less rare if we focus on these three aspects, Sambandha, Abhidheya, and Prayojana, because then we won't be distracted by the external, either in one extreme or the other, by rejecting it prematurely or not accepting it when it can actually help us get to a place where, our consciousness can become more easily purified and redirected, right? So it's an instrument. The mode of goodness is an instrument. If we are in need of that instrument, we use it until we get the result. And then we drop that instrument. It's no longer required. We put it down. So when it's needed, we use it. And when it's no longer needed, we put it down. This is the process of Krishna consciousness. Understanding who we are, how to, and in relationship to Krishna, how to act according to that relationship appropriately and favorably. And then only accepting things that are favorable to Krishna service, rejecting things that are not. Right. So sometimes a thing that once was favorable can become unfavorable, and vice versa. Sometimes something that was used to be unfavorable can now become favorable if we're able to understand it properly in that relationship. I hope, did that answer your question in some sort of way?
It did. That was a great explanation.
It can become tricky.
Yeah.
Same with anything, because anything can be used in Krishna service. But even the lower modes, by the way, we all use the mode of ignorance in Krishna service every night. We have to sleep. That's mode of ignorance. But if we do the right amount of it, then we have the right amount of energy so that we can engage in Krishna service, right? If we do too much of it and then we become lazy and then we try to put off our devotional service, that's also mode of ignorance, but they're two different things. One's being used properly, one's being misused. So anything can be used properly in Krishna service. We just have to know how to do it. And the way to do that is focus on what is my actual relationship with Krishna, actual. How do I act according to that relationship in an appropriate, favorable way? And then if we do that, we attain the goal. So if we focus on that, as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu points out, as Srila Prabhupada points out, then this process becomes a whole lot easier if that's what we focus on. Otherwise, we get caught up in these details. We consider that these details are actually the principles, and then we wonder why we're not making very fast spiritual advancement, right? But this is always the reason, because we're not understanding our actual relationship, acting according to that relationship. So it'll be a bit before we actually reach the ultimate goal. So all discussions on any Vedic literature, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, it all comes down to these things. And we see that Srila Prabhupada, in our language, has been giving this to us the entire time. And we just have to have the intelligence and the sincerity to apply this to every aspect of our life, right? So that gradually, as time goes on, we're more and more primarily engaged actually in the service of Krishna, and not just in a detail which can be engaged in the service of Krishna. In the chat, Mitravinda Mataji is asking to discuss what is spiritual advancement, what does it look like, then that there are so many myths. So spiritual advancement means that one's consciousness is being redirected from self-centric to God-centric. So we spirit souls, we are individuals. Individual means I am, it means ego. In the material world, ego is usually a bad thing. It means egotistical. But ego just means the sense of identity. So there's actual ego, proper ego, which is I am, and then identifying as one's constitutional nature, I am servant of Krishna. And then there's false ego, which Srila Prabhupada talks about often. And he distinguishes between the two, by the way. This isn't just me. Um, and false ego is misidentifying, thinking oneself to be independent from Krishna, right? And so spiritual advancement means, and it's a scale, right? So there's, I am, independent from Krishna. I am servant of Krishna, and we have this tendency to uh, know in theory that we are servants of Krishna, but act as if we are independent from Krishna. So spiritual advancement means going from this identity, the false identity, to the real identity, right? And as one identifies with closer and closer toward one's real identity, these modes of nature are peeling off. Uh, uh, One is able to see things as they are and act accordingly. In Srimad Bhagavatam 5:18-12, it says that all the qualities of the devatas naturally become manifest in someone who is redirecting their consciousness in this way, actually engaging in Krishna service. So this is what it looks like. It means that we are our thoughts, words, actions uh, are less centered around this identity of us being independent from Krishna and more focused on being identifying as servants of Krishna. And as that happens, all of these various qualities that are listed in so many different sources are automatically becoming manifest as a secondary aspect, right? So that's what spiritual advancement looks like. Um, I don't know what the so many myths are. I could probably guess. I've heard many of them. But this is what Srila Prabhupada describes as spiritual advancement, right? You do what you do, but you do it for Krishna, right? And then with that consciousness, one becomes purified, and then one will naturally realize that some of the things that we were doing could be done in a different way to please Krishna better, right? Because they were previously being done to please ourselves, right? So as we get this clarity, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, we understand which things are actually favorable, which things are not. And so we accept the ones that are favorable, we reject the ones that are not. Sometimes it's difficult because our attachments are very strong. But if we're sincere, if we continue to take uh, the proper position in the relationship with our spiritual master and with Shastra and with Krishna, then we're able to, again, redirect the consciousness from self-centric to God-centric. And that's what spiritual advancement looks like. I hope that answered the question, Mitravinda. Is there anything else? Do you want to try, Prabhu? You're unmuted.
I
Something
was just
else?
going to ask you real quickly, what's it like in Mayapur? Is it Advaitacharya's appearance day today
It
there?
is Advaitacharya's Parents' Day in Mayapur. I am currently in Kentucky.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
oh, it's okay. I flew back from Mayapur just a couple of weeks ago, and I'll fly back again next month. So I'll head back, I think, March 3rd. But for now, I'm in Kentucky trying to work out some medical issues. But yeah, they are. Well, I should say they did celebrate today. It's
Yeah.
already, let me look at the time there. Yeah, it's 7:35 at night. So yeah, they had that celebration today. Thank you, Acharya Prabhu. Okay. Anything else? Alrighty, then we will end here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
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 Ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Jai. Vanchakalpatarubhascha, Kripasindhuvyeva Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Chair Chandra Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.